They said the fire was an accident, but the official report, dated November 3rd, 1818, failed to account for a single lady's glove found beneath the charred floorboards of the Duke's private study. According to the Beaumont family archives, meticulously preserved at the Durham County Record Office, this small piece of evidence would unravel a conspiracy of financial ruin and social sabotage that reached the highest echelons of the aristocracy. You need to hear this story because it exposes the brutal reality behind the glittering facade of Regency society. But before we get to the shocking public accusation that followed, you must understand why Miss Eleanor Vance, a woman with nothing to her name, was in the Duke's private wing that night. It all began with a desperate attempt to escape a ballroom. The chandeliers of Landon House dripped light onto the swirling silks and glittering jewels of the London season. For most, this was the arena of ambition. For Eleanor Vance, it was a gilded cage. Hired as a companion to the flighty Miss Isabel Croft, Eleanor's purpose was simple: to be invisible. Her dress, a modest slate gray, was designed to blend into the shadows, a stark contrast to the vibrant peacock hues favored by the debutantes. According to social historian Dr. Evelyn Reed, author of The Unseen Hand, Women of the Regency Underclass, companions like Eleanor occupied a precarious social space. They were neither servant nor guest, Dr. Reed writes. Their existence was a constant performance of deference, their livelihoods dependent on the whims of their employers. Eleanor was performing flawlessly. Her charge, Isabel, was safely occupied with a wealthy but witless baron. This gave Eleanor a moment to breathe, a moment she used to retreat toward a less crowded alcove near the musicians. Her task for the evening was nearly complete. All she had to do was survive the next 2 hours without drawing any attention. The thought alone was exhausting. We've all felt that pressure to be perfect, to meet expectations that feel impossible. For Eleanor, that pressure wasn't just about social grace. It was about keeping a roof over her mother and younger sister's heads. Her eyes scanned the room, a habit born of necessity. She cataloged the players, the ambitious mothers, the predatory rakes, the powerful dowagers whose gossip could ruin a reputation before the final waltz. And then she saw him. He wasn't part of the crowd. He was a void within it. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood, stood alone near a marble hearth. His presence was a tangible force, a pocket of silence in the cacophony. Dressed in severe, immaculate black, he was a figure of stark authority. They didn't call him the Winter Duke, as the transcript of a similar tale suggests. The Tun had a sharper name for him, the Iron Duke. It was said he had rebuilt his family's fortune, which his father had nearly squandered, with a terrifying blend of mathematical precision and ruthless negotiation. A letter from his solicitor, dated June 5th, 1816, reveals the scale of his success. His Grace has, in 2 years, tripled the estate's yield and eliminated all outstanding debts. He was the season's most formidable prize and entirely unattainable. Eleanor felt a prickle of cold that had nothing to do with the draft from the terrace doors. Men like that were a different species. They operated on a plane of power she could scarcely imagine. Her own family, the Vances, had once been respected merchants until a disastrous shipping venture, sabotaged by a competitor, had left them bankrupt. The official bankruptcy filing from 1814, stored in the National Archives, lists debts totaling over £20,000, an insurmountable sum. Her father's name was still whispered with a faint taint of failure. All she had to do was remain a ghost. But ghosts, it seemed, were not immune to catastrophe. Isabel, having tired of her baron, was now waving her fan with dangerous enthusiasm at a notoriously charming and utterly penniless cavalry captain. Panic seized Eleanor. This was the exact scenario she was paid to prevent. She set her untouched lemonade down and began to move, hugging the wall, a gray moth in a room of butterflies. She slipped past a cluster of gossiping ladies, their words about the latest scandal washing over her. She was almost within reach of Isabel when a sharp voice cut through the air. "Do mind where you are placing your feet." It was Lady Annabel Finch, a diamond of the first water, whose family held a long-standing rivalry with the Duke of Blackwood. She hadn't been in Eleanor's path, but had deliberately stepped into it, a petty display of power. The momentary delay was all it took. Isabel accepted the captain's arm, her laughter echoing too loudly. Eleanor's mission had failed. The shame felt like a physical weight. All she wanted was to vanish. She turned, abandoning her pursuit of Isabel for a new objective. Escape. A side door used by servants led to a dimly lit corridor and a back staircase. If she could just reach it, she could collect herself before facing her employer's wrath. Her gaze fixed on the door, she hurried her steps, oblivious to the world around her. She didn't notice the dark figure detaching himself from the hearth, moving with a silent, unnerving purpose. She was inches from the door, her hand outstretched, when she collided with something as unyielding as a stone wall. A gasp was knocked from her lungs. She stumbled, her world tilting. A hand shot out, not gripping her arms, but clamping onto her wrist with a strength that was both steadying and shocking. Her head snapped up and she found herself looking into the coldest, grayest eyes she had ever seen. They were the color of steel, analytical, and utterly devoid of warmth. Alistair Beaumont, the Iron Duke, held her wrist, his gaze pinning her in place. His expression was not one of anger, but of intense, focused evaluation. In that moment, Eleanor Vance knew her desperate bid for invisibility had failed in the most spectacular way possible. The Duke's grip was like a manacle. The noise of the ballroom faded, and the universe shrank to the few inches of space between them. For a man of such imposing presence, his touch was surprisingly measured, yet absolute. There was no escaping it. "My Lord Duke," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The proper etiquette would be to apologize profusely, to dissolve into a flustered mess. But the shock of the collision, combined with the shame of her failed duty, forged an unexpected and dangerous resolve within her. She tried to tug her wrist free, a futile gesture. "You are in a hurry, miss?" he said. His voice was a low baritone, as devoid of inflection as his expression. It wasn't a question so much as a demand for information. He didn't release her. Instead, his gaze dropped from her face to her gloved hand, then back to her eyes. He was assessing her, not as a woman, but as an anomaly. This interaction was becoming a spectacle. Pay attention to this detail because it becomes crucial later. Whispers were starting to ripple through the nearby guests. Lady Annabel Finch was watching, her lips curved into a triumphant smirk. The Duke holding a nobody was a prime piece of gossip. "If you would be so good as to release me, Your Grace," Eleanor said, forcing a calm she did not feel, "I would not wish to create a scene." A flicker of something, was it surprise, disturbed the icy stillness of his features. He had likely expected submission, not a direct command. For a terrifying second, she thought he would refuse, simply to assert his authority. Then he uncurled his fingers. She snatched her hand back, rubbing her wrist. "My apologies for the inconvenience, Your Grace." She curtsied and turned to leave, her one goal still the servant's door. "Wait." The single word stopped her as effectively as a physical barrier. It held an absolute, unbreakable authority. Slowly, she turned back. The Duke had taken a step closer. "You were not fleeing the room," he stated, not asked. "You were heading for the corridor that leads to the East Wing, to the household ledgers." Eleanor's blood ran cold. How could he possibly know that? The East Wing was primarily administrative offices. There was no reason for a guest or even a companion to go there. What would you do in this situation? Lying to a duke was a dangerous game. I was disoriented, Your Grace," she stammered, the lie feeling flimsy even as she spoke it. His eyes narrowed. "You do not strike me as a woman who becomes disoriented." He took another step. "At the precise moment you began your escape, Lord Harrington was discussing the latest quarterly reports from his shipping ventures. He mentioned a discrepancy of 2% in the tariffs paid on imported French silks. You flinched, an almost imperceptible reaction, but I saw it. Why would a companion care about tariffs? This was a nightmare. Her father had taught her accounting. He had drilled into her the importance of numbers, of spotting the inconsistencies others missed. It was a skill that had become an instinct. Harrington's casual boast of profit had registered in her mind as a mathematical impossibility, given the known tariff rates published in the London Gazette. It was a tiny error, but to her it was a glaring red flag. She had flinched because she had recognized a lie. "I have no interest in tariffs, my lord," she insisted, her heart pounding. He ignored her denial. "Your name," he commanded. To give him her name Vance was to link herself to her family's disgraced past. It was a risk she couldn't afford, but to refuse was unthinkable. "It is Vance, Your Grace," she said softly. "Miss Eleanor Vance." He stared at her, an unreadable expression on his face, as if he were turning the name over in his mind, examining it from all angles. "Vance," he repeated, "of the Vance Merchant Company?" The question was a physical blow. She could only nod, the heat of humiliation creeping up her neck. The company was defunct, its name synonymous with failure. He said nothing more. With a curt nod, he turned and strode away, leaving Eleanor standing alone, exposed and trembling, the weight of his focused attention a far heavier burden than his grip had been. She had not only failed to be invisible, she had become a puzzle to the one man in London whose notice could utterly destroy her. The encounter with the Duke had consequences. Within a day, the whispers had begun. Not about a potential romance. No one would be so foolish as to imagine the Iron Duke courting a penniless companion, but of a more curious nature. Why had he spoken to her? What was his interest in a failed merchant's daughter? Eleanor's employer, Mrs. Croft, was furious not at the Duke, but at Eleanor for drawing attention. "Your sole purpose is to ensure Isabel's success, not to become a topic of speculation yourself," she hissed the next morning. The real danger, however, arrived 2 days later. She was summoned to a small, unused parlor to find Lord Ambrose Finch, Lady Annabel's brother, waiting for her. He was handsome in a predatory way, with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Miss Vance," he said, dispensing with pleasantries, "you have made an impression on Blackwood." "I merely stumbled into him, my lord. It was an accident." "With the Duke, there are no accidents," Finch countered, his voice smooth and cold. "He is a man of numbers and calculations. He sees the world as a grand ledger, and he noticed you. I want to know why." When she remained silent, his demeanor shifted. The charming facade fell away, replaced by something ugly. "Your family's financial situation is delicate," he said softly. "I took the liberty of acquiring some of your late father's outstanding debts. A significant sum. It would be a pity if the collectors were to descend upon your mother's modest residence." This was the moment of high-stakes conflict she had dreaded. Have you ever felt powerless against the privilege of the wealthy? It's a chilling, helpless feeling. Finch was using her family's poverty as a weapon. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Information. The Duke is my rival. His recent acquisitions in the West Indies have cost my family a fortune. I want you to find out what he is planning. Get close to him. Report back to me." "I cannot," she whispered. He smiled, a cruel, satisfied expression. "You can and you will, or your family will find themselves in a debtor's prison by Christmas." Historical records from the Marshalsea prison show that in 1818, the average lifespan of an inmate was less than 5 years. Think on that. Eleanor was trapped. To spy for Finch was a betrayal of any moral code she possessed. To refuse was to condemn her family. Don't go anywhere. What she chose to do next would set her on a path far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. That evening, a sealed letter arrived. It bore the ducal crest of Blackwood. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax seal. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. "Be at the rear entrance of my London residence, Blackwood House, tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Come alone. A matter of mutual interest." It was signed simply, Blackwood. Finch's threat on one side, the Duke's cryptic command on the other. Eleanor felt as though she were standing on a cliff edge, with a chasm on either side. She made a decision. She would go to the Duke, but not as a spy. She would go as herself and face the consequences. The next morning, she arrived at the appointed address. A severe-looking housekeeper led her not to a grand salon, but to a stark, functional office. Books of accounts lined the walls and maps were spread across a large mahogany desk. The Duke was standing by the window, staring out at the gray London sky. "You came," he said, turning to face her. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Perhaps I am simply out of options, Your Grace." He gestured to a chair. "I have spent the last 2 days investigating you, Miss Vance. Your father was not a failure. He was a brilliant accountant, betrayed by a business partner who falsified shipping manifests. A man named Thomas Finch, Lord Ambrose's father." Eleanor stared at him, stunned. He knew. "I do not believe in coincidences," the Duke continued, his voice precise. "I believe in patterns. The Finches have been attempting to sabotage my financial interests for months, using the same methods they used to ruin your father. Small discrepancies, ghost shipments, falsified tariffs. I have seen the signs, but my own accountants, men of impeccable reputation, cannot find the source of the bleeding. They are looking at the books, but they do not know how to look for a lie." He paused, his steel gray eyes locking onto hers. "But you do. I saw it in your face at the ball. You recognized Harrington's lie instantly. It is in your blood." Here was the shocking revelation. This was not about a social slight or a fleeting interest. It was a business proposition. "I am offering you a position, Miss Vance, a temporary one. I want you to examine my ledgers. I need an accountant with your father's instincts, not a society-trained clerk. I will pay you a sum that will settle your family's debts and secure their future. You will work here, in secret. No one will know." This could happen to anyone forced into a corner. The offer was a lifeline, but it came with its own dangers. It would place her in direct opposition to Lord Finch, the very man who held her family's fate in his hands. But it was a chance to fight back, to use the skills her father had given her, not just to survive, but to reclaim her family's honor. "What you are asking of me is dangerous," she said, her voice steady. "If Lord Finch discovers my purpose here—" "I am aware," the Duke cut in. "I will provide for your protection. The choice, however, is yours." Eleanor thought of her mother's worn hands, her sister's hopeful face. She thought of the injustice that had shadowed her family for years. She had been a ghost for too long. "I accept," she said. The real scandal was just beginning. For the next 3 weeks, Eleanor lived a double life. By day, she was the quiet companion to Isabel Croft. By night, she was poring over the Blackwood estate ledgers in the Duke's silent, imposing office. Alistair, the Duke, was a demanding employer. He was exacting, logical, and emotionally distant. But he was also fair. He provided her with every document she requested, no matter how confidential. According to Dr. Margaret Thornberry, an expert on Regency-era inheritance law, granting a woman, particularly one of no social standing, such access was unprecedented, notes a modern historical analysis. It shows the Duke's desperation and his remarkable, if cold, pragmatism. Eleanor's expertise, long dormant, flourished. She worked with a focus that impressed the Duke. She moved through the columns of figures like a composer reading a score, he later wrote in a private journal entry, time-stamped 2:17 a.m. on October 28th. She found the narrative hidden in the numbers. She discovered a pattern of minute overpayments, tiny administrative fees, and rounding errors spread across dozens of accounts, from the purchase of grain for his tenants to the importation of wine for his cellars. Individually, they were insignificant. Data from the Royal Archives shows that estates of this size had a typical margin of error of around 1.5% in their accounts, one report states. The discrepancies Miss Vance found were within this margin, making them almost impossible to detect through standard auditing. But when aggregated, they amounted to a fortune being siphoned away from the estate. During their late-night sessions, a strange sort of partnership formed. He would watch her work, his expression unreadable. "How did you see that?" he asked one night, as she circled a barely perceptible anomaly in a shipping invoice. "My father taught me that people lie, but numbers, when properly interrogated, cannot," she replied without looking up. "He said to always look for what isn't there. In this case, there is no corresponding customs seal for a shipment of this size on this date." He was silent for a long moment. "My father saw numbers as an inconvenience," he finally said, his voice quiet, "a resource to be spent. I have spent my life correcting his errors. I vowed never to be so careless." It was the first crack in his iron facade, a glimpse of the man beneath the title. He was not just cold, he was disciplined, haunted by the fear of repeating his father's mistakes. Anyone who's had to clean up a family member's mess knows that burden. It changes you. The closer Eleanor got to the truth, the more danger she was in. Lord Finch, impatient, sent her another threatening note. She ignored it. Then one evening, as she was leaving Blackwood House, a street thug attempted to snatch her portfolio of notes. She was saved only by the intervention of one of the Duke's footmen, who had been ordered to watch over her. The attack confirmed their suspicions. Finch knew she was getting close. "This must end," Alistair said that night, his face grim. "What do you need to prove it?" "The master ledger," she said. "The one that consolidates the accounts from all the estates. If the fraud is as systematic as I believe, the final proof will be there. It's kept in your private study." They went to the study, a room Eleanor had never entered. It was the heart of the Duke's world. As he unlocked a heavy safe, she felt a chill. She noticed a window latch was slightly ajar, a detail that seemed trivial at the time. As she opened the master ledger, the truth became horrifyingly clear. The forgeries were masterful, but they all originated from a single clerk in the employ of the Finch family's primary bank. And there, at the bottom of a page authorizing a massive transfer of funds, was the signature. Not of the Duke, but a near-perfect forgery. "I've found it," she whispered. At that exact moment, the smell of smoke filled the air. A sudden whoosh of flame erupted from the heavy velvet curtains near the open window. The fire spread with unnatural speed, racing across the priceless rugs and up the wood-paneled walls. It was arson. "The ledger!" Alistair shouted, moving to grab it. A burning ceiling beam crashed down, blocking his path and separating them. The room was filling with thick, black smoke. "Get out, Eleanor!" he yelled, his voice strained. But the ledger was the only proof. Without it, everything was lost. Her family would be ruined. The Duke would be crippled. Finch would win. In that moment of terror, Eleanor made a choice. She wrapped the heavy book in a small damp rug from the hearth, cradling it to her chest. She searched for an escape, but the flames were everywhere. The main door was blocked. Choking on the smoke, she saw the Duke fighting his way toward her. Just as he reached her, another beam collapsed. He shoved her clear, taking the brunt of the impact himself. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The fire, the threat, the unconscious Duke. It all led to this. She had to save him and the proof. Dragging the Duke, who was a dead weight, and clutching the precious ledger, she fought her way to a side door, her lungs burning. As she stumbled out into the corridor, her glove, snagged on the doorframe, was torn from her hand, falling unnoticed into the chaos of the burning study. She collapsed in the hallway just as the household staff arrived. The aftermath was a blur of calculated chaos. The fire was extinguished, but the Duke's study was destroyed. Alistair escaped with a broken arm and minor burns. The official cause was listed as an errant spark from the fireplace. Lord Finch publicly offered his sympathies. But Alistair knew the truth, and he had the ledger. The next week, at a hastily convened meeting of the Lords of Trade, Alistair Beaumont made his move. Lord Finch was in attendance, looking smug and confident. Alistair, his arm in a sling, stood before the assembly. "My lords," he began, his voice ringing with cold fury, "I am here today not to discuss tariffs, but to expose a conspiracy of fraud and attempted murder." He presented the smoke-damaged ledger. He laid out the evidence Eleanor had compiled, a meticulous and undeniable chain of corruption leading directly to Finch. "This evidence," Alistair announced, "was gathered by Miss Eleanor Vance, a woman of greater integrity and intelligence than any man in this room." Finch laughed. "The word of a disgraced merchant's daughter against a peer of the realm? It's absurd." "Is it?" Alistair countered. "Perhaps we should ask the fire marshal about the lady's glove found in the ashes of my study, a room she had never entered until the night of the fire." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "But the glove, you see, was not hers. It was a man's glove, sized for a larger hand, with the distinctive stitching of a tailor favored by Lord Finch. He had laid the perfect trap. The glove he presented was not Eleanor's lost one, but an identical one taken from Finch's own home by one of Alistair's agents. Finch, knowing he had lost a glove in the study, saw the evidence and blanched. His composure shattered. He had been outmaneuvered. The public payoff was devastating. Finch was ruined, his name and family disgraced. But the fight wasn't over. The scandal was immense. Rebuilding the Duke's finances would take years of careful work. Eleanor, now a public figure, faced the scorn of those loyal to the Finches. Alistair, however, stood by her. He first cleared her family's debts, as promised. He then went a step further, using his influence to publicly exonerate her father, publishing the proof of his innocence in the papers. He restored the Vance name. In the quiet aftermath, as they worked together to restructure the Blackwood estate, the professional respect between them deepened into something more. He was still the Iron Duke, but she now saw the unwavering loyalty and fierce sense of justice beneath the cold exterior. One evening in the newly rebuilt study, he turned to her. "This is not enough," he said. "Restoring your family's name, paying a debt, it does not address what you have become to this estate, to me." He proposed a radical idea. He was establishing a new branch of his enterprise, a philanthropic legacy dedicated to education access for the children of merchants and tradesmen. It would require meticulous oversight and absolute financial transparency. He wanted her to run it. "It is a position of great responsibility," he said. "It requires a partner I can trust implicitly." It was a brilliant move, securing her future, promoting youth literacy and local craftsmanship, and cementing a role for her in his life that was built on merit, not just affection. Through this work, they would focus on family wellness programs and responsible governance of the charitable funds, ensuring sustainable stewardship for generations. It was a partnership of mind and purpose. "And what of us, Alistair?" she asked softly, using his name for the first time. He took her hand, his grip no longer a manacle, but a warm, protective embrace. "My life has been a fortress, Eleanor. You breached the walls. The winter is over." Their story became a quiet legend, a testament to a love built not on frivolous romance, but on shared principles of community trust and historical preservation. A soft mystery remained. The full extent of Finch's network was never fully uncovered, suggesting other powerful figures had escaped justice. But that was a battle for another day. For now, the Iron Duke and the merchant's daughter had found their own kind of peace, proving that the strongest foundations are built on truth, courage, and a shared commitment to public service. If this story of justice and resilience moved you, hit like to help spread this untold chapter of history. What do you think will happen to them next? Drop your prediction below and subscribe for more historical revelations. The truth always matters.